under a 2002 financial crimes law applying to evidence tampering.
From the Capitol on January 6th and was charged with this obstruction of an official proceeding.
The case brought by Joseph Fisher, who entered the Capitol on January 6th and was charged with obstruction.
Supreme Court's Capitol riot decision. The Supreme Court's recent ruling on a January 6 defendant's obstruction charge marks a significant turn in the legal landscape surrounding the Capitol riot cases and potentially impacts broader implications for similar prosecutions. This decision has implications not just for the individual case in question, but also for the numerous defendants facing charges related to the storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Following the unprecedented attack on the Capitol, federal prosecutors pursued charges against more than 350 individuals involved in the pro-Trump mob. Among these charges, obstruction of an official proceeding stood out as a critical tool, carrying a hefty maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. This charge was levied under a law enacted in response to the Enron scandal, aimed at punishing actions that interfere with the integrity of official processes. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., writing for the majority, highlighted concerns about the overly broad interpretation of the obstruction statute by prosecutors. The court's ruling emphasized that prosecutors had applied the statute in ways that exceeded the intent of Congress, which originally intended the law to target more narrowly defined actions that impede the use of documents or records in official proceedings. The case specifically addressed the prosecution of Joseph W. Fisher, an alleged participant in the Capitol riot. The Supreme Court's decision directs his case back to lower courts for further proceedings, indicating that prosecutors must now demonstrate that defendants materially obstructed the use of documents or records in an official proceeding to sustain an obstruction charge. This ruling not only affects Fisher's case, but also sets a precedent that other defendants charged with obstruction can cite in seeking dismissal of similar charges. Moreover, the implications extend beyond individual cases to potentially impact high-profile cases, including those involving former President Donald Trump. Trump faces allegations related to his actions and statements following the 2020 presidential election, including charges of conspiring to obstruct the certification of election results. Two of the charges against Trump rely on the same obstruction statute that the Supreme Court found improperly applied in Fisher's case. Special counsel Jack Smith, responsible for prosecuting Trump, has maintained that even if the Supreme Court invalidated the obstruction charges for rioters, the charges against Trump should stand due to the distinct nature of his alleged conduct. This argument reflects ongoing legal debates over the interpretation and application of obstruction laws in politically charged contexts. The Supreme Court's decision has sparked discussions about prosecutorial discretion and the boundaries of statutory interpretation in criminal cases involving political ramifications. Critics of the court's decision argue that it may hinder efforts to hold accountable those responsible for the violent insurrection at the Capitol. Conversely, supporters contend that the ruling underscores the importance of adhering to legislative intent and ensuring that criminal statutes are applied narrowly and constitutionally. In practical terms, the ruling compels prosecutors to refine their approach to charging individuals involved in the Capitol riot. They must now demonstrate a clear connection between the actions of defendants and the obstruction of official proceedings, rather than relying on a broader interpretation of obstruction statutes. This requirement may lead to strategic adjustments in how prosecutors build and present their cases in ongoing and future trials related to the January 6 events. Supreme Court limits prosecutorial discretion. The Supreme Court's decision in Fisher v. United States has significant implications for the prosecution of individuals involved in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, including its potential impact on cases involving former President Donald Trump. The ruling centered on the interpretation of the obstruction statute, under which more than 350 defendants were charged for obstructing an official proceeding during the Capitol riot. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., writing for the majority, criticized prosecutors for an overly broad reading of the statute arguing it allowed for excessive discretion in seeking severe penalties, such as a 20-year sentence, for conduct that Congress intended to punish with lesser terms. The case specifically involved Joseph W. Fisher, whose obstruction charge was overturned by the Supreme Court because prosecutors failed to demonstrate that he impaired records, documents, or other objects for use in an official proceeding. This ruling is expected to prompt similar challenges from other defendants charged with obstruction, potentially leading to dismissals of those charges if prosecutors cannot meet the newly clarified legal standard. For Trump, who faces multiple charges related to allegedly conspiring to obstruct the 2020 election results, the Fisher decision provides a legal avenue to challenge the obstruction charges against him. Trump's legal team has been active in seeking to dismiss the case, and while they have not commented directly on using Fisher's precedent, the decision offers them a strategic opportunity to argue against the validity of the obstruction charges in their client's case. In response to the Supreme Court's ruling, Attorney General Merrick Garland expressed disappointment, but emphasized that the majority of the January 6 defendants would not see their cases affected. Garland underscored the gravity of the Capitol attack, describing it as an unprecedented attack on the fundamental process of transferring power between administrations. He assured that the Department of Justice would comply with the court's decision in cases directly impacted by Fisher, indicating a commitment to uphold the rule of law while adjusting prosecutorial strategies as necessary. Jeffrey T. Green, Fisher's lawyer, highlighted the significance of the ruling in clarifying the application of the obstruction statute, suggesting it would redirect prosecutions back to the statute's original intent focused on evidence tampering. This narrower interpretation aligns with broader judicial trends in recent years, where the Supreme Court has curtailed prosecutorial discretion in certain criminal cases to mitigate concerns of overreach and over-criminalization. Looking forward, the decision sets a precedent that limits prosecutors' abilities to apply obstruction charges broadly to protesters or participants in government proceedings that turn violent. It reaffirms the judiciary's role in scrutinizing the statutory basis for criminal charges, ensuring that legislative intent is respected and that criminal liability is appropriately tailored to the conduct at hand. While the immediate impact of Fisher v. United States is on pending cases related to the Capitol riot, its implications extend to future prosecutions involving similar charges of obstructing official proceedings. Prosecutors will need to adhere closely to the newly clarified legal standards, focusing on demonstrating actual impairment of official records or proceedings to sustain obstruction charges successfully. Supreme Court decision impacts. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., writing for the majority, criticized federal prosecutors for their broad interpretation of the obstruction statute. He argued that the statute's language does not clearly encompass the actions seen during the January 6 attack, such as obstructing the certification of election results. Roberts emphasized that Congress did not specifically envision such scenarios when enacting the statute, questioning whether lawmakers could be faulted for this lack of foresight. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, though agreeing with the majority, offered her own perspective in a separate opinion. She highlighted that Congress likely did not intend to create an all-encompassing obstruction law applicable to a wide range of situations. Jackson suggested that the Justice Department could still pursue charges against January 6 defendants if it can demonstrate interference with specific records or documents related to the electoral process. Legal experts, like former federal prosecutor Randall Eliason, interpret the ruling as affirming the viability of certain charges against higher-profile defendants, including former President Donald Trump. Eliason noted that actions like submitting false evidence, integral to Trump's alleged involvement in the fake electors scheme, could still qualify under the obstruction statute as clarified by the court. However, the decision poses logistical challenges for prosecutors handling January 6 cases. Eliason acknowledged that resentencing and additional court proceedings for affected defendants would be cumbersome. While it may not drastically alter the overarching prosecution strategy, Eliason predicts that only a subset of cases where obstruction was the primary charge will see significant impacts. Approximately 27 rioters currently incarcerated solely for obstruction-related charges and 110 others awaiting trial or sentencing may now seek legal recourse following the Fisher decision. Many defendants charged in connection with the Capitol attack were not accused of obstruction, but rather lesser offenses like trespassing or attacking law enforcement officers. Prosecutors reserved the obstruction charge for those accused of actively disrupting the electoral certification process. The aftermath of the Supreme Court's ruling has already prompted reviews of sentencing and potential early releases for some defendants. It highlights the legal complexities and varied implications across the spectrum of January 6 prosecutions, where the obstruction charge played a pivotal role in defining the severity of defendants' criminal liabilities. Attorney General Merrick Garland expressed disappointment with the decision, but affirmed that the majority of January 6 prosecutions would proceed unaffected. He stressed the unprecedented nature of the Capitol attack and reiterated the Justice Department's commitment to upholding the rule of law in prosecuting those involved. Looking ahead, the ruling in Fisher v. United States underscores ongoing debates over prosecutorial discretion, statutory interpretation, and the balance between criminal accountability and legislative intent. It sets a precedent for future challenges and interpretations of obstruction laws in cases involving public protests and governmental proceedings. As the legal landscape continues to evolve, particularly in high-profile cases like those stemming from the January 6 Capitol riot, the Fisher decision marks a pivotal moment in defining the contours of federal criminal liability and the limits of prosecutorial authority in politically charged contexts. That's all for this video, folks. We'll see you next time.